Good morning, everybody. We'll call this meeting of regulated industries on to order. Committee members, look, you've got a flyer in there with some subcommittee assignments. I hope you all can get along. If you want to swap around, you don't like who's on it, you can talk to me about it. But we're required to have subcommittees in case we need to deliberate. So anyway, we like to get them out of here before it has to get down to that point. We've got several bills on the calendar today, that variety of bills. Ought to be interested. And the first bill is going to come up is House Bill 96, authored by Amos Amerson. So, Mr. Amerson, you've got the...
Thank you, sir. We are operating from LC 361771S, which is a substitute to the original bill. Now, this bill does only two things, sir. The first, it changes the percentage of registered voters needed to call a referendum. And the second thing it does is change the requirements for holding the special election where current law says not more than 60 days. As you know, sometime in the past, we passed a law that set up specific days for referendums, including splashes and loss and things like that. This particular bill, in reducing the 35% of the registered voters to 5%, is more realistic and creates a more democratic situation where the people in the counties or the metropolitan areas can get a referendum on package stores on the ballot, or get a particular subject on the ballot. It's unrealistic, maybe unrealistic is not the word, but we very seldom have 35% of the people even turn out to vote unless it's a major primary or presidential election. So to get 35% of those who are registered to sign a petition so that we can have a referendum, to me seems unrealistic. So by lowering it to 5% of the registered voters, we bring it more in line with those who really turn out to vote, and it allows the people of the counties then to put the question of whether or not they can have package stores on the ballot. And that's about the size of it. We believe it's an economic issue, and in my particular county, we do not have any package stores. We'd like to have one or two. We have to go to Hall County, or we have to go to Dawson County. And those package stores, as you can imagine, are located pretty close to the county line for my people to drive. So we would like to keep that money in the county, and so we're asking you to change this law so that it will make it easier for not only us, but for all the other counties. And I don't understand what the hang-up would be, because it would, in terms of the product, make it easier for the people to acquire the product. So it would seem to me that people who are the distributors would be more in favor of this, because we'll have more package stores available. And with that, sir.
Question, Representative Dixon.
It would seem to me, and I'm proposing it to you to see if you would agree, that the 35% figure was chosen in part so that we don't have counties constantly flipping back and forth. It makes it, you have to really work to get it on the ballot to have package stores, but you also have to have a pretty significant group get together to try to change it back the other way. And so if you change it from 35 to 5% here, you take out that balance that's there. I mean, it doesn't just make it 5% to become a wet county. It makes it 5% to to become a dry county. It works both ways, and
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I believe the counties ought to have the right to decide what they want to be, and I trust the voters. Always have.
I trust the voters too, but we're not talking about the voters. We're talking about what it takes to get something on the ballot for the voters.
But they still have to vote. That's my contention. I put lots of things on the ballots, and some of them fail, some don't.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, we got one. Representative Chuck Martin.
Mr. Chairman, if you take a question, where did the 5% come from? I'm sharing Representative Dixon's concern about 5%. And right offhand, how many registered voters are there in your county?
Oh, in my county, there are 14,000 and change, which means that 35%, I have to get over 5,000 people to sign a petition in order to put it on the ballot. And to me, that's unrealistic, because you very seldom have more than about 3,000 turn out and vote, 2,000 to 3,000.
But in that case, I guess the concern at 5% that would seem to be falling on Representative Dixon's question is not true, that at 5% of 14,700 people, you could essentially run that petition, year after year after year to put it on or take it off, even if it didn't, in the previous election, if it went out there and it got 25% in the election, that same 5% could run it out at the next special election. I think I'd share.
If they go to trouble.
Perhaps 30. I guess what I'm getting at, and maybe we'll certainly do what the chairman wants to do this morning, but it seems like perhaps 35% may be too high, but I would contend that 5% would be, perhaps too low, and be interested. There may be some folks from counties and cities that would incur the cost of those elections to have the flip back and forth. I just wonder if there had been any thought along those lines.
Yes, sir. If you look at subparagraph D.
Okay.
Following the expiration.
Okay, so they can't do it but every 2 years, and you didn't change that. Okay.
Yes, sir. That would be the most optimal.
Okay.
That's not a universal. That's only kicks in if it's after a vote fails.
Well, that would keep them from putting it in year after year, and I believe that's what Representative Martin is alluding to.
No, I don't think that's the case. That would only apply if it went to a vote of the people and that vote failed.
Right.
If you had a vote that passed, you could come back 6 months later and enter another petition to change the vote. This would not prevent that.
No, but if you look at the section that allows you to, when you can vote, that you can only hold an election at the major primaries
Right.
and general election, which are every 2 years.
Yeah, I would still feel
Well,
that
if you don't
flipping
like
every 2 years
5%,
is
give me another percentage and we'll talk about it.
35%.
No, sir. That's the problem.
Okay. Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask a question. I guess it's already been answered, but in this same referendum process, this could also be a reversal of the right.
That seems to be
I mean,
Representative Dixon's hang-up. Yes, sir.
So while you're proposing that we lower that petition number to 5%, it also mean 5% could also consistently put it back on to repeal.
Well, they could put it back on every 2 years.
Section 3-4-47, it has the procedure for if you want to, if election of this nature is successful, what type of petition is required to defeat that and get that back on the ballot. And it, at the present time, requires signatures by 35% of the registered voters. And then it has that same 2-year provision, so that they have to wait 2 years. If they are able to get 35% and you go through the referendum and the referendum fails such that those sales are still allowed, then they would have to wait 2 years, get 35% more, and then have it put back on the ballot to try to defeat the sales in that jurisdiction, if that answers your question.
So if in a community, if there's alcohol package sales permitted right now, and if a activist anti-alcohol temperance group, say, wanted to do away with package sales in the community, then they could turn it around at 35% at the same time. Is that correct?
That's currently on the books. If sales are permitted pursuant to a referendum that was held in accordance with this article, then that's presently law. Yes, sir.
So does that mean that we would have 5%, could possibly have 5% to enact the law, but 35% to defeat it?
If the legislation that you are discussing today passes, yes, sir.
So it shouldn't, Representative Dixon, did you get the message that it would take 35% of the registered voters signing a petition to take it to a referendum so that it could then be removed? And I have no objection to that part at all, because I don't plan on removing it.
So you only trust the voters if they want to put it on?
Well, I trust them as much as you do.
I'm kidding.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? Representative Jurgens.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick, what's the other alternative of having package stores approved in your county besides this?
That's what we're trying to find out from the people who've objected. They say there's no other alternative. But I was under the impression that when we created home rule that the commissioners would be allowed to put it on. But they can't find any legal way of doing that, they're claiming. They've asked the Attorney General for a ruling on that. They've informally contacted the Department of Revenue, and the Department of Revenue says they can't do it without a petition. And I don't understand that part. I would think the commissioners ought to be able to put it on if they want to.
Anybody else have any questions of the committee? Okay, I think we've got one person that would like to speak on the bill. Ms. Emily Louie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
that would only bring in 1,500. And most of these collectors will only get half that number. It might be physically possible to collect the signatures of 35% of the voters in densely populated areas. I do not believe it's possible in our rural areas. The first 1,500 can be collected in meetings and public events. After that, you do a lot of driving, and it takes a lot of time. I'm sorry. Can you hear me? My decision to be the point person for this petition followed a statement by one commissioner who said he wished somebody would start the petition because our county needs the money being paid by our citizens that benefits other counties. Our county attorney has advised our commissioners that based on interpretation of the law by the Department of Revenue and several past attorney generals, county commissioners do not have the power under home rule to allow package sales without following the petition process set out in Code Section 3-4-41. House Bill 96 will do nothing more than reduce the number of signatures required on the petition to allow us to have a referendum where the voters can make the decision. Please understand, we need the money. We have lost jobs and we have lost property values. We need the taxes paid for package sales to help our county do the things it's supposed to be doing. And I encourage you to approve the reduction in the number of signatures. I haven't talked with Representative Amerson about this, but if we could go to 10%, hey, we can do that. But we will never be able to get 35% unless somebody wants to come help us a whole lot, and I don't think you can still do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chairman, I'd like to make some observations about what's been said today. We all seem to be talking about package sales of alcohol. The thing that I would be concerned about are other matters that would come before commission that non-alcoholic beverages are involved. That may be some unsavory petition to put into effect something else. The fact that the lady said that some people won't sign anything, well, whether it's 35% or 5%, if they're not going to sign, then you defeated the purpose. I'm going to put this in the study committee and let's get this thing hashed out. Alan Powell, come to your committee, meet with them, and see what we can work out on this thing. Okay. Okay. House Bill 166. Alan Powell is the author of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and gentlemen of the committee. House Bill 166 is basically a rewrite. It's quite simply, it deals with the professional engineers and the surveyors in the state. We haven't dealt with this issue in over 30 years. Currently, to stand for the engineering test or the engineering and training and then the full engineering certification or the surveyor and training and surveyor's licensure, there's no educational requirements as far as a formal education. Because of this and because of the changes in those two professions over the last several years, they have had less than 50% pass rate on the examinations. Both associations have come to us and they've asked that we make certain requirements of a 4-year education or college education. And what this bill does, it set forth that you would have a 4-year degree of prescribed study by the licensing board and taking those subject matters that would be germane to that profession. If you look at it, both these professions are in the same title section. Now the dates, only thing I can tell you is that I'm going by the dates that's been put forth by the licensing boards, so that those people who are already in training, such as engineering training or the surveying training, so that they wouldn't be affected, and it gives them a time forward that they can finish, get their license, or stand for those tests. And the same with the surveyors.
Paul, let me we're working on committee substitute, which is LC 36-1758S.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Everybody got that? All right.
Be more than glad to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from the committee? Seem to be no questions. Okay. Oh, got Representative Chuck Martin.
President Powell, so this came about because folks that had been meeting the education requirements required prior to this piece of legislation were taking the test and failing.
Yes.
So we now wish to have them take larger or a larger series battery of educational requirements.
Actually, to pass a certain core curriculum and get a degree.
Exactly. Now, and I only bring this up because we had a couple of years ago about the accredited law schools, and you had to be an accredited, come out of an accredited law school in order to take the Georgia bar. And I think some of the conversation there, if you can pass the bar, why does it matter what law school you went to? I guess the question here is, why do we care if people are spending money and not passing the test? You still have to pass the test in order to be qualified. I just want to make sure we're not quelling, in this economic time, folks that are, trying to get into business, and those that can pass the test but do not have the wherewithal to spend the money on these classes, where we're not keeping them from pursuing, a career that they can otherwise have an opportunity to. You follow me?
I follow what you're saying, and looked at the statistics that's been provided by the licensing board. Engineering, being a professional engineer, that's a pretty serious profession, especially in the design and such as that. Surveying as a real estate broker, I take surveying as a very serious matter also. The two pass in both of these professions. They have the what's called the EIT and the SIT, the surveyor and training, and engineering training. Once they take that test and they pass that test, then they've got a 4-year journeyman period that they operate before they can take the full examination. And what they found is that they're not having enough people that are actually passing the test. I think most of us know in most things, except for politics, a formal education or a liberal arts degree tends to enhance the viewpoint about certain professions. Got an example, the surveying business has changed so much over a period of years. Hydrology has become a real serious part of the surveying industry. There's nothing that describes that they have to have any particular formal course of study. And what this does is prescribes a formal course of study. Our surrounding states that surround the state of Georgia, they have these educational requirements, as do a lot of other states in this country. And this hopefully will only increase the standards to make better engineers, make it easier so that they can have the knowledge to pass those professional tests and surveys.
And I'm not going to belabor the point, but again, and maybe there's somebody here from the board, if they can pass the test, it seems they have the knowledge. Where they picked up that knowledge, we're sort of prescribing to them in this legislation where they have to pick up that knowledge. I'm not an expert in the field, so Mr. Chairman, I'm not wasting any time on it, but I still am at a pause for why this document should tell people what they have in order to get the knowledge they need to pass the test. They can pass the test. I mean, years ago, Georgia had no requirement to go to law school. If you could pass the bar, you could be an attorney. Over the years, that's changed. I'm not an attorney, and perhaps that is good for the profession. Well, I mean, I don't mean to be flippant when I say that. If one can, I've not sat for the bar and not qualified, but I'm told if one can pass the bar, you know the law.
I do.
Certainly, in the medical field, studying as an intern, as a resident, is a requirement in addition to just passing the board. And I suppose that's what we're doing here. So, I mean, I certainly yield to the folks. I just don't want to put a lot of administrivia and bureaucratic minefield out there in this economy when people are trying to, get a job, get into a profession, and be productive. That's my slight pause.
Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Powell, as I look at the legislation you propose, isn't it currently required that the engineers and surveyors have a 4-year college degree?
No, sir.
That's
Not
not
currently.
Okay. Is there any requirement for continuing education
Yes, sir.
Under the new legislation?
No. Under the
But
old,
right now.
under the old rules and regs of licensure, they have to have C&E, just like basically any other profession.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, I believe we've got some people who'd like to speak on the bill. Thank you, Representative Powell. Trent Turk. Tell us who you are and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Trent Turk. I am with SAMSOG, the Survey and Mapping Society of Georgia. We represent about 600 surveyors in the state. There's about 1,200 total in the state. I won't belabor all the points that Representative Powell has already covered. He covered it very well. I would address the concerns from Representative Martin. One of our challenges is the test has 100 questions on it, multiple choice questions, and they cover a broad array of subject matter. If you flip to the back of your handout, I purposely put the subject matter in there for y'all to see. It's a very broad. It used to be you could be an apprentice by working for your dad, learning how to traverse and find corners, take that test, learn how to calculate those corners, and you could be a land surveyor. But today, when we give a person a land surveyor's license, they have tremendous power with that license to offer services to the public. So it's really about protecting the public. And in our industry particularly, it's rampant, unfortunately, that people offer services to the public with this license when they really aren't qualified. And we could line up members of planning commissions around the state that could come testify to the poor quality they get from some of the people that have gotten licenses, particularly through an apprenticeship route without a foundation. So what this is about really is laying a foundation for these people to be able to function as a surveyor appropriately, because you can see the broad subject matter that's covered on this test. And our test is administered by the hours and the engineers. It's administered by the NCEES. That's a National Council on Engineering Examiners. It's been written for 4-year degree candidates for years, and that goes to why we're having them fail. They get there without a degree. They don't have the foundation to understand these questions. They've taken a few courses that teach directly to the test, and they make it in under the wire having been taught specifically to the test, but they don't have the foundation that we're looking for and we think the profession needs. So this really is about moving the profession to the position it needs to be, given what's able to be offered from that license. And we're playing catch up here in Georgia. The second page shows all the other states around us are getting on board with this. They've been on board. Many of these have had it. Florida's had it for 12 years. So we're behind in that regard. One more comment. It's a disservice to a high school senior right now to tell him the law says you can get in surveying and you can get your license and make a really good living. And the kid chooses, well, I don't have to have a degree, so I'm going to get in it and do that. And he invests 10 years of his time and becomes a 29-year-old with a family and kids, thinking he's going to get his license. It takes that long once he gets out of high school to acquire the necessary experience that the board's going to require him to get before he can sit for that test. He sits for that test, and when he sits down, he sees this content matter here that you see on the back and realizes he's ill-prepared, may never pass it, and the law didn't keep him out of it. I think that we need this law. So anyway, I'm there. Any questions?
Don't see any. Thank you very much. Oh, hold it. Got one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick question. Of the surveyors that you represent, about how many currently don't have a college education in a related field?
We do not have that data, actually. We haven't polled the membership, but I would say I'm just guessing here, but well over half have a degree.
Okay, so so your estimation is about half don't, and they've passed the exam.
That's right. Especially the younger ones. It's migrating to it whether we do this or not. People are going and getting degrees so they can be a land surveyor now, as opposed to years past. The majority of the ones without the degrees are the older guys, the ones that came up through the apprentice route years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tom Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Tom Leslie. I represent the American Council of Engineering Companies, about 250 private sector engineering companies. Our organization is involved in an engineering alliance, which consists of about a dozen engineering societies, highway engineers, structural engineers, and lots of others. And we try to coordinate our opinions on legislation. And the American Council of Engineering Companies supports this bill, as does each of the associations in that alliance. And we think it's a good bill. Just to address your concern, Mr. Martin, I think in the engineering world, there are very, very few folks that don't proceed through to become licensed engineers that don't have a college degree. I spoke with the chairman of the board yesterday in some detail, and he said that in some years there are no people that find a non-degree pathway to becoming an engineer. He said in some of the more complicated years there may be one or two people that actually would be excluded from becoming licensed now. His view, and I asked him if I could tell you this, is that this is really a great step forward in terms of acknowledging the complexity of the engineering world today. Instead of just a 2-lane paved road, we now have 8-laned freeways. We have bus rapid transit. We have 50-story buildings, and the world has gotten complex, and they strongly support college degrees. And the phase-in in this in the amendment, Mr. Powell's bill, acknowledges the way the trend is going right now. With respect to an exam only versus a college degree, I think, you can roll the dice, and if you really get the right questions on the exam, you can score well. But 4 years of college provides just a breadth of understanding and a depth of understanding that kind of builds up to the exam as kind of just one of the qualifications, and we think that's a good idea. We urge the committee to approve the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Leslie. Okay. Well, let's see. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion that we do pass House Bill 166.
Got it.
As
Committee substitute, okay. You heard the motion and the seconded. Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Bill goes out with a due pass recommendation. Thank you. Okay, Representative Powell, we got a little time left. We might as well get 165 while we're here. Representative Al Williams, we're probably going to have to cut it off after this one. We'll pick it up next week if it's a satisfactory. I hate for you to wait, but time is running short. Oh. Thank you. Representative Powell, we're talking about House Bill 165, LC 285412.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and gentlemen of the committee. Let me scratch my head. 22 years of dealing with every kind of issue under the shining sun. this has been quite the anomaly of a bill. Very simple bill in its face. This bill has passed this committee twice, it's passed the Senate twice, and it's still lingering around out there. This bill was put in to solve a problem. The public housing authorities in the state of Georgia, there's currently a 100-yard setback to put a package store, on-premise sales. Package stores, there is no setback for package stores and convenience stores next to the properties of these public housing authorities. And what this bill, this comes out of Barrow County. The city council and the mayor, they had all agreed that they had a prospect for a restaurant that was going to be located and couldn't do it. And this bill is basically to correct that. What it says is that the cities can create an exemption to that setback, that 100-yard setback rule, if they so wish, with the acquiescence of the local housing authority. Now, I will tell you that the housing authorities, most of y'all know that housing authorities, their boards are appointed by the mayor and the councils and by the county commissions. So this is where the contention has come in. There's been several meetings. I've tried to put the parties together to no avail. So thus I scratch my head and leave this to the will of the committee. The bill that is proposed in front of you is the bill that has passed in recent years. So whatever this committee wishes to do.
Any questions from the committee? Representative Powell, I got a few. Brett. Tom.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Just, I'll be real brief. I've got a couple of concerns here. One is basically line 22 and 23. As a former municipal elected official, I don't think that I'm kind of loath to give up elective power to a non-elected board, essentially veto power to a non-elected board over a municipality. It's a de facto veto if they don't approve that. Be interested to see if they'd be willing to take that out. And the other portion that I have, the other question I have is basically requiring the applicant to file with the county or municipality by written recommendation approval for the board of commissioners or a city council. You know, if the city or a county has an ordinance in place allowing the county manager or city manager to make administrative decisions on that, I don't think we should burden them with having them pass another ordinance on that. I just want to see what your thoughts were on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Who we got? Representative Chuck Martin.
Chairman, you may throw me off your committee. I have so many questions this morning. Representative Powell, tell me this: if in my city there was adopted by referendum to say that you could serve alcohol or sell alcohol within 500 feet of residence or a place of worship, but no closer. If that exists in this particular referendum now, passing this legislation would not circumvent that legislation. If they had something that said, I mean, housing authority is a residential zoning classification. If a city or county had something in place that said you can't be closer than 500 feet, passing this would not override that. Is that correct?
Would not. That decision would be up to what this does. This would give the local elected officials the ability to give an exemption just in this area with a 100-yard setback from housing.
Even if by referendum the people in that city said that you should have this no closer than 500 feet to any residence, this would say that you could now be closer to a housing authority property where people live. No,
basically, I mean, it puts this authority in the hands of your county commission, and as proposed currently with the acquiescence of the board of the housing authority.
Okay, that gives me some pause. If by referendum people said we don't want to have package sales or on-premise sales within 500 feet of residence, I would want to be very careful that we passed a state law that said, oh, except if it's a housing authority owned property.
And I don't think that this, and Sean Murray may can answer this, but I do not think that this would circumvent the purpose of a.
So this wouldn't override a local ordinance that was adopted on the attorney? my understanding is this came about because in the particular jurisdiction, you can have this sales, but by local ordinance you can, but by state law you cannot. Is that correct, Representative Powell? To a housing authority.
Well, this doesn't deal with the local. This is general statute.
I know, but so if local law in that area allowed them to be there today, they can't because state law says they cannot. And we're trying to change state law to stop that prohibition. But if the local
give the local officials the right
I stand correct, absolutely, to give them the right to amend it. My question is, if local ordinance said they couldn't be there, Madam Attorney, would this say they could, if by agreement? Do you see I understand it's by agreement, and I understand we're trying to set aside state law if local law is not in the way, but if local law says you can't be there, does this override that?
Representative, while the attorney looks at that, and my dealing in carrying distance bills over the last 3 or 4 years, we have state minimum distance requirements, but locals can enact stricter requirements should they choose to do so. So this in no way prohibits them from enacting more strict requirements.
That was my question. I mean, if there are stricter requirements in place, this would not override them even by agreement.
I believe it would.
Thank you.
Representative Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate Representative Powell presenting this, and we've spoke about several of my concerns that I share with Representative Taylor here. One, of course, being that it appears that the Housing Authority has achieved some measure of superiority over the board or the commission that appointed them, and that I have a struggle with that as well. And the one other issue on this that I would like to mention is on line 34, where it says the municipality shall authorize by resolution or ordinance. I think we discussed the potential of striking the word ordinance and inserting an administrative order. In some cities or counties, by previous ordinance of that body, their city manager or county manager may have been authorized to do certain administrative acts. And if that official is already previously authorized by ordinance of the county, and one of those acts could be permits and variances and so forth, it seems to me that that would suffice to allow this variance to move through a more administrative procedure. And I just wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
What you're saying is that if in a form of government where there's a county manager or county administrator or city manager, city administrator, that if the city council has provided this exemption through a resolution, that they can, that hired person can carry it out.
Yes, sir. And if that hired person had been, if that was one of the authorized duties of his role, then he would or she would be allowed to administer that.
If this is the will of the committee, I would tip my hat.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Representative Dixon.
Would you accept an amendment to remove the words on lines 22 and 23, starting with the comma, and then by agreement with the local housing authority, comma? Just remove those.
If that's the will of the committee.
If you will accept that, I'd make a motion to do pass with that amendment.
Okay, that's very fast. Motion and a second. Any further discussion from the committee? All right.
Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate to make an additional amendment, or how would that work?
Well, we can take them one at a time.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, before us is a motion to amend it by taking the words from by agreement with local housing authority, taking that out of the bill. All those in, all right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask the author and the individual that's representing the entity that this affects of how that will affect their situation.
My understanding that if that amendment is striking those words, if that puts it back into the hands of the elected governing authorities.
Okay, we've heard the motion. All. Well, we got a motion on the floor right now. We've got to act one way or the other on it. All those in favor of the motion to strike those words, say aye. Opposed, like sign. Okay, motion carries. How much time we got left?
6 minutes. Time for one more minute, I think.
Okay. What you got to say?
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to ask, because of the time and the speakers wish to have everybody in the chamber for the passer of the day, would it be terrible if we held this over to the next meeting so that the gentleman has time to speak without rushing through it?
That would probably be the proper thing to do, since we've got some unanswered questions, probably another proposed amendment. You better hurry.
About 30 seconds.
Okay. Have we got time to get that little bill passed? Okay. State your motion, Reverend Harrell.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment was going to go slightly further than that. But for brevity, I would make the motion that on line 34, after the word ordinance, make the addition of or administrative order. So it'll read, shall be authorized by resolution or ordinance or administrative order. And if I've got my ors, mays, and shalls, okay, then that would be my motion.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion is passed. We now vote for the bill as amended. Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Bill passed with a due pass recommendation.